The sound of a gun cocking echoed through the dusty main street of Eldorado Canyon, Nevada. Freezing time for a heartbeat before Temperance, Zimmerman felt the rough hands gripping her arms loosen just slightly. It was 1875, and in the unforgiving heat of the Nevada desert, 4 men had decided her fate, or so they thought, until the tall figure stepped from the shadows, revolver drawn and blue eyes cold as winter. "She goes nowhere," the cowboy said, his voice carrying across the tense silence with the weight of iron. The 4 men holding Temperance halted their progress toward the Gilded Lily Saloon, where girls like her disappeared into lives of shame and servitude. Temperance could feel her heart hammering against her ribs as dust swirled around them all, a tableau of violence suspended in the golden afternoon light. Just hours ago, she'd been a respectable woman with prospects. Now, she was caught between brutal men who saw her as property and a mysterious stranger, whose intentions remained as obscure as his shadowed face beneath the wide brim of his hat. The tallest of her captors, a man with a jagged scar running through his left eyebrow, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "This ain't your business, mister. The girl's spoken for." "I'm making it my business," the cowboy replied, taking a step forward. Now Temperance could see him clearly, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind, yet not much older than her own 22 years. "Let her go. You know who you're crossing," another captor growled, a squat man with fingers like sausages digging into Temperance's arm. "Carson wants this one for the Lily. Special order." The cowboy's mouth twitched slightly. "And I want you to release her. Seems we have ourselves a disagreement." Temperance had arrived in Eldorado Canyon just 3 days prior, responding to an advertisement for a schoolteacher position. The stagecoach had delivered her to what seemed a promising new start after the death of her parents had left their Kansas farm drowning in debt. But the school board representative who'd met her had been nothing but a procurer for William Carson, the owner of the Gilded Lily and half the businesses in town. The scarred man reached for his gun, but the cowboy was faster, firing a shot that kicked up dirt between the man's boots. "Next one won't miss," he said calmly. "I'll say it once more. The lady goes nowhere with you." "You're dead, McClain," the scarred man snarled, but he released his grip on Temperance's arm. The others followed suit, backing away slowly. "That's what folks keep telling me," the cowboy McClain answered. "Yet here I stand." He gestured with his gun. "Now get." The 4 men retreated, muttering curses and promises of retribution. Temperance stood frozen, her legs trembling beneath her travel-worn skirt, until the cowboy holstered his weapon and approached her. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "No," she managed, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Thank you, Mr. Brock McClain," he said, tipping his hat. "And you'd be the new schoolteacher, I reckon." "Temperance Zimmerman," she confirmed, trying to collect herself. "Though it seems there is no school after all," Brock nodded grimly. "Carson's been pulling that trick for months. Brings in educated women with promises of respectable work, then forces them into his saloon." He glanced down the street. "Those men will be back with more. We should get you somewhere safe." "I have nowhere to go," Temperance admitted. "My ticket was one way and I spent nearly everything I had getting here." Brock considered this, squinting up at the sun. "My sister runs a boarding house on the edge of town. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. She might even have work for you. Why are you helping me?" Temperance asked, unable to keep suspicion from her voice. Men's kindness, in her experience, always came with conditions. Brock's expression darkened. "Carson's men took my younger sister 3 years ago, by the time I found her." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "I'm sorry," Temperance said softly. "Come on," he said, collecting her carpet bag from where it had fallen in the dirt. "Sun's getting low and we've got a ways to walk." As they moved away from the main street, Temperance could feel eyes watching from windows and doorways. Eldorado Canyon was clearly a town with many secrets and few allies. She had stumbled into something dangerous, but as she matched her steps to Brock McClain's steady stride, she felt, for the first time since arriving, that she might have found someone she could trust. The boarding house sat at the end of a winding dirt road, its weathered clapboard exterior belying the warmth within. Smoke curled from the chimney, and flower boxes hung beneath the windows, unexpected touches of beauty in this harsh land. "Ruby," Brock called as they approached. "Got someone who needs a room." The door swung open to reveal a woman with the same striking blue eyes as Brock, though her brown hair was shot through with premature silver. She looked Temperance up and down with an appraising gaze. "Another one of Carson's marks?" she asked. "Would have been if I hadn't stepped in," Brock confirmed. Ruby sighed and opened the door wider. "Come in, miss. You look like you could use some hot food and a strong cup of coffee." The interior was modest but meticulously clean, with a large common room furnished with mismatched chairs and a long dining table. A pot bubbled on the stove, filling the air with the rich aroma of beef stew. "Thank you," Temperance said, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. "I can pay for a night or two, but after that, we'll sort that out later," Ruby interrupted, taking her bag. "First, let's get some food in you, then you can tell us your story." Over bowls of stew and fresh baked bread, Temperance recounted how she'd come to Eldorado Canyon, explaining about her parents' deaths and the farm's foreclosure. "I'm trained as a teacher," she said, "but I can do other work: cooking, cleaning, sewing. I'm not afraid of hard labor." "We could use help here," Ruby said thoughtfully. "I've more boarders than I can manage alone, mostly miners and railroad men, decent sorts mostly. They'd appreciate a woman's touch with the cooking." "I don't want charity," Temperance insisted. "It's not charity if you're working," Ruby countered. "Room, board, and $3 a week. That's fair." Brock, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. "Carson won't give up easily. He paid for your ticket here and he'll consider you his property." "I belong to no one," Temperance said firmly. A ghost of a smile touched Brock's lips. "No, madam, I can see that you don't. Still, you should know what you're facing. Carson owns the sheriff, the mayor, and most of the businesses in town. He's not used to being denied." "What would you suggest I do? Run away in the night?" Brock exchanged a look with his sister. "That might not be the worst idea. There's a stage to Virginia City day after tomorrow." Temperance set down her spoon. "Mr. McClain, I have run far enough. My entire life has been uprooted. I will not be chased away by some saloon owner with delusions of ownership over my person." Ruby laughed suddenly, a bright sound in the quiet room. "I like her, Brock. She's got sand." Brock didn't look as amused. "Sand won't stop a bullet. Neither will running," Temperance countered. "If not here, it would be somewhere else. There are William Carsons in every town." "Not all of them have the power he does," Brock warned. "And not all of them have someone like you standing in their way," Temperance said quietly. Something shifted in Brock's expression, surprise, perhaps, or respect. He pushed back from the table. "I'll check the perimeter before dark. Ruby, get Miss Zimmerman settled in the back room. It's the most defensible if trouble comes." After he left, Ruby showed Temperance to a small but comfortable bedroom with a narrow window overlooking a kitchen garden. "Don't mind my brother," Ruby said as she laid fresh linens on the bed. "He's been fighting Carson's operation for years, ever since we lost our sister Lily." "The saloon, the Gilded Lily, is named after her?" Temperance asked, horrified. Ruby's hands stilled. "Carson's idea of a joke. Lily was only 16 when his men took her. Brock was away riding with a cattle drive by the time he got back. She swallowed hard. She didn't survive what they did to her. "I'm so sorry," Temperance whispered. "Brock's never forgiven himself. He's been trying to atone ever since, helping girls when he can. Carson's put a price on his head, but no one's been brave enough to collect it, yet." "Is that why you stay?" "Because of your brother, partly," Ruby admitted. "But this is our home. Our parents built this place. I won't be driven out by a man like Carson." She smoothed the quilt with work-worn hands. "Get some rest, Miss Zimmerman. Tomorrow comes early in this house." Sleep eluded Temperance that night. She lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the boarding house, the creaking of the wooden structure as it cooled, the distant murmur of men's voices from the common room, the occasional howl of a coyote in the hills beyond town. Through her window, she could see Brock's silhouette as he patrolled the yard, a rifle cradled in his arms. She had never meant to bring trouble to these people's door, but neither could she deny the spark of determination that had ignited within her. For too long, she had been at the mercy of circumstances: her father's gambling, her mother's illness, the bank's foreclosure. Perhaps it was time to stand and fight as the McClains were doing. With that resolution warming her heart, Temperance finally drifted into sleep, her dreams filled with dust and gunfire, and the steady blue gaze of a cowboy who had stepped between her and disaster. The morning brought the clatter of activity as the boarding house came to life. Temperance rose early, washing quickly in the basin of cold water Ruby had left for her, and donned her simplest dress, a navy cotton with white piping that had seen better days but would serve for kitchen work. She found Ruby already at the stove, frying slabs of salt pork and mixing batter for flapjacks. "Good morning," Temperance said. "May I help?" Ruby looked relieved. "Bless you, yes. The miners will be down soon, hungry as bears. There's coffee to be made and the table needs setting." Working side by side, they prepared breakfast for the dozen men who soon filed in, most nodding respectfully to Temperance before taking their places at the long table. They were a rough-looking lot, with weathered faces and calloused hands, but their manners were surprisingly gentle in Ruby's domain. Brock entered last, looking as though he hadn't slept at all. His eyes immediately found Temperance, assessing her with a quick glance before he took his seat at the head of the table. "Miss Zimmerman's going to be helping me run the place," Ruby announced to the room at large. "I expect you'll all treat her with the same respect you show me." There were murmurs of agreement and a few friendly nods in Temperance's direction. She felt a strange sense of belonging as she moved among them, pouring coffee and serving plates laden with food after breakfast. As the men filed out to their jobs, Brock lingered behind. "I need to go into town," he told Temperance. "Ruby can show you what needs doing here. Don't leave the property today." "Is that an order, Mr. McClain?" Temperance asked, arching an eyebrow. "A strong suggestion," he replied. "Carson's men will be watching for you." "And what will you be doing in town?" "Making inquiries," he said vaguely. "Seeing what Carson's planning." "Be careful," Ruby called from the kitchen. Brock nodded and left, his spurs jingling softly as he walked to the barn where his horse was stabled. The day passed in a whirl of domestic activity. Temperance helped Ruby with laundry, scrubbing shirts and sheets until her hands were red and chapped. They cleaned the boarders' rooms, prepared a midday meal for the few men who returned for it, and started preparations for dinner. "You're a good worker," Ruby commented as they peeled potatoes at the kitchen table. "Where did you learn to keep house?" "My mother taught me," Temperance said, the familiar pang of loss squeezing her heart. She believed a woman should be able to run a household even if she had other ambitions. "And what are your ambitions if not teaching?" Temperance considered the question. I wanted to open a school of my own someday, somewhere children of all backgrounds could learn, regardless of their circumstances. Ruby smiled. That's a fine dream. What about you? Did you always want to run a boarding house? No, Ruby admitted. I wanted to be a doctor. I even apprenticed with one for a while back east. But then our parents died and Lily needed looking after. She trailed off. Life has a way of changing our plans. It does indeed, Temperance agreed, thinking of her own diverted path. They were interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching at speed. Ruby went to the window, her expression tightening with concern. It's Brock, she said, and he's riding hard. They hurried to the front door just as Brock reined his horse to a stop, dust billowing around him. His face was grim. Carson's called in reinforcements, he said without preamble. 6 gunmen arrived on the noon stage. They're combing the town for you, Temperance. For me. Temperance felt a chill despite the warm day. Why would he go to such trouble? Brock dismounted, leading his horse toward the water trough. It's not just about you anymore. It's about me interfering. Carson's using this to make a point. What do we do? Ruby asked. We prepare, Brock said simply. They'll come tonight, most likely, under cover of darkness. The afternoon was spent in preparations. Brock checked and cleaned his weapons, a Winchester rifle, 2 Colt revolvers, and a shotgun that had seen better days. Ruby revealed a surprisingly thorough knowledge of firearms, loading and positioning guns at strategic points throughout the house. Temperance watched them work with growing unease. I can't let you risk your lives for me, she said finally. I should leave, draw them away from here. And go where? Brock asked, looking up from his work. They'd run you down before you made it 5 miles. I won't be the cause of more death, Temperance insisted. You said yourself that Carson took your sister. I won't let him take anyone else because of me. Brock set down the rifle he was cleaning and approached her. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the tiny scar at the corner of his mouth, the flecks of gray in his dark beard. This fight was coming one way or another, he said quietly. Carson and I have been circling each other for years. You're just the spark that lit the fuse. That doesn't make me feel better, Temperance said. It's not meant to. It's just the truth. He hesitated, then added, if you want to help, Ruby can show you how to load a shotgun. It doesn't take much aim, just point and pull the trigger. The idea of handling a weapon terrified Temperance, but she nodded resolutely. Show me. The afternoon faded into evening. The boarders returned from their work, and Brock explained the situation to them. Most decided to seek accommodations elsewhere for the night, but 3, a grizzled old miner named Davies and 2 brothers who worked the railroad, elected to stay and fight. Carson's been squeezing us on claims for years, Davies explained, checking the action on a well-worn Remington. About time someone stood up to him. As darkness fell, they positioned themselves throughout the house. Brock took the front porch, rifle across his knees. Ruby guarded the back door while Davies and the brothers covered the windows. Temperance was stationed in the kitchen, the loaded shotgun feeling impossibly heavy in her hands. The hours crept by in tense silence. Midnight came and went. Temperance's eyes grew heavy despite her fear, the events of the past 2 days catching up with her. It was the soft whinny of a horse that alerted her, a sound so slight she might have missed it had she not been straining to hear anything unusual. She peered through the window but could see nothing in the moonless night. Then a voice called from the darkness. McClain, we know you're in there. Send out the woman and we'll let the rest of you live. Brock's voice was steady when he replied. You're not getting the woman and you're not welcome on this property. Ride away while you still can. A harsh laugh answered him. Got 7 guns out here, McClain. How many you got? 3, 4. Those aren't odds I'd bet on. I like my chances just fine, Brock called back. The first shot came without warning, a muzzle flash in the darkness, followed by the crack of a bullet splintering the porch railing. Brock returned fire immediately, the Winchester's report thundering through the night. What followed was chaos. Gunfire erupted from all directions, bullets shattering windows and thudding into the wooden walls. Temperance crouched behind the kitchen table, which Ruby had overturned as a barricade, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Ruby fired methodically through the broken window, her face set in grim determination. "Stay down," she ordered Temperance. "Don't shoot unless someone tries to come through that door." Minutes stretched like hours as the gunfight continued. Temperance could hear shouting from outside, cries of pain, the pounding of boots on the porch. Then came a sound that turned her blood to ice. Brock's voice, raised in a cry of agony. Before she could think, Temperance was moving, crawling across the floor toward the front of the house, the shotgun clutched in her trembling hands. She reached the hallway just as the front door burst open, and a massive figure silhouetted against the night stepped inside. Without hesitation, Temperance raised the shotgun and pulled both triggers. The recoil slammed her backward as the weapon roared, and the figure in the doorway crumpled with a startled cry. Beyond him, she could see Brock on the porch, one hand pressed to his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "Brock," she called, scrambling to her feet. "Stay back," he warned, but it was too late. Temperance was already at his side, helping him to his feet as gunfire continued to pepper the house from the darkness. "Inside," he gasped, leaning heavily against her. "Need cover." Together they staggered back into the house, stepping over the body of the man Temperance had shot. She caught only a glimpse of his face, young, barely older than she was, his eyes wide and staring at nothing. Ruby appeared from the kitchen, her face white with fear when she saw her brother's blood-soaked shirt. "How bad?" "Through and through," Brock grunted. "Left shoulder. I'll live." "Not if we don't stop this attack," Ruby said grimly. She peered out the broken window. "I count 4 down, including the one by the door. That leaves 3, maybe 4. A voice called from the darkness again. "McClain, that's enough bloodshed. We're taking our men and leaving." "But this isn't over. Carson's men never retreat," Brock said suspiciously, allowing Temperance to ease him into a chair. "Maybe they've had enough for one night," Davy suggested, emerging from his position by the window, his face streaked with gunpowder. They listened as horses galloped away, the sound fading into the distance. For a long moment, no one moved, waiting for the trick, the renewed attack. But the night remained silent except for the creak of the house and the labored breathing of the wounded man. "Let me look at that shoulder," Ruby said, already gathering bandages and a basin of water. Temperance helped Brock remove his shirt, wincing at the sight of the bullet wound, a neat hole that had punched through muscle and out the back. It was bleeding freely but didn't appear to have hit anything vital. "You were lucky," Ruby pronounced after examining it. "A few inches to the right and you'd be meeting Lily in the hereafter." Brock grimaced as she began cleaning the wound. "Wasn't luck. Bad shooting." His eyes found Temperance's face. "Unlike you, that was good work with the shotgun." Temperance felt ill remembering the man she had killed. I didn't mean to." "He would have killed us all," Brock said quietly. "You did what you had to do." The remainder of the night passed in uneasy vigilance. Davies and the brothers took turns standing watch while Ruby tended to Brock's wound. Temperance sat beside him, occasionally wiping his brow when fever threatened to take hold. "Why did you really help me?" she asked softly as dawn approached, the first gray light filtering through the broken windows. "It can't just be because of your sister." Brock was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "When I saw those men dragging you toward the saloon, you looked defiant." "Not broken, not yet." He shifted, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. Most of Carson's girls are already beaten by the time they reach the Lily, but you had fight in your eyes. Reminded me of Lily before. Before they took that from her, Temperance finished when he couldn't. He nodded, his jaw tight. I couldn't save her, but I could try to save you. Temperance took his hand, her fingers curling around his calloused palm. You did save me, and now I aim to return the favor. As morning broke fully over the Nevada desert, they assessed the damage. The boarding house was riddled with bullet holes, windows shattered, furniture splintered. The body of the man Temperance had killed was moved to the barn until the undertaker could be summoned. 3 other bodies were found in the yard, Carson's men who had died in the assault. He's not going to let this stand, Brock said as they surveyed the carnage. 7 men dead or wounded. Carson will come back with more. Then perhaps we should take the fight to him, Temperance suggested. All eyes turned to her in surprise. What do you propose? Ruby asked cautiously. Carson's power comes from fear and intimidation, Temperance said. But what if people stopped being afraid? What if they saw that he could be defied? You're talking about turning the town against him, Davies said, stroking his beard thoughtfully. That's a tall order. Folks here have been under his thumb for years. Not everyone, Temperance pointed out. You 3 stayed to fight. There must be others who resent his control. Brock was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, respect, perhaps, or concern. What you're suggesting is dangerous. Carson has the law on his side, corrupt as it is. Then we need to expose that corruption, Temperance said firmly. Show people the true nature of the man who rules their town. Ruby exchanged a look with her brother. She has a point, Brock. We've been fighting defensively for years. Maybe it's time to change tactics. I'm too recognizable, Brock said, gesturing to his wounded shoulder. Carson's men will be watching for me. They won't be watching for me, Temperance said. I'm just a woman after all, hardly worth noticing. The irony in her voice was unmistakable. No, Brock said immediately. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than staying here waiting for them to return with reinforcements. Temperance challenged. I'm not proposing to confront Carson directly, just to gather information, perhaps find allies. She's got sand, that one, Davies chuckled. Reminds me of my late wife. After much debate, a plan began to take shape. Temperance would go into town disguised as a washerwoman seeking work, allowing her to move relatively freely while gathering intelligence on Carson's operations and seeking potential allies among the townspeople. The brothers would accompany her but keep their distance, ready to intervene if trouble arose. Brock was adamantly opposed to the plan, but his injury left him in no condition to offer alternatives. Reluctantly, he provided Temperance with detailed information about Eldorado Canyon, which businesses Carson controlled, which people might be sympathetic to their cause, and most importantly, the layout of the Gilded Lily Saloon. There's a back entrance Carson uses to bring in girls without being seen, he explained, sketching a rough map. It leads to a series of rooms on the 2nd floor. That's where he keeps the new ones until they're broken in. The casual brutality of his words made Temperance shiver, but she committed the details to memory. If there were other women being held there against their will, perhaps she could help them escape. Ruby provided clothes for her disguise: a shapeless gray dress, a faded shawl, and a bonnet that shadowed her face. With smudges of dirt on her cheeks and her hair tucked away, Temperance barely recognized herself in the small mirror Ruby held up. "You'll pass for a widow down on her luck," Ruby said approvingly. "Just keep your head down and your ears open." Before they departed, Brock pulled Temperance aside, his face tight with concern. "If you're recognized, don't try to fight. Run. The brothers will create a diversion." "I'll be careful," she promised, "Temperance," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I know we've only just met, but—" He hesitated, seeming to struggle with his words. "Come back, please." Something in his eyes made her heart beat faster. She nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. The walk into town was tense, with Temperance keeping her head bowed and her pace unhurried despite the fear fluttering in her chest. The brothers Sam and Thomas Wilson followed at a distance, posing as miners headed to the assay office. Eldorado Canyon looked different in daylight, smaller, somehow, yet no less intimidating. The Gilded Lily dominated the main street, its gaudy facade a stark contrast to the utilitarian structures surrounding it. Men lounged on its porch despite the early hour, bottles in hand as they watched the town's sparse traffic with predatory eyes. Temperance kept to the boardwalk's edge, playing the part of a woman accustomed to making herself invisible. She stopped at the general store first, where the proprietor, a nervous man named Jennings, eyed her suspiciously. "Looking for laundry work," she mumbled, keeping her face partially hidden by the bonnet. "Or cleaning. Anything honest," Jennings snorted. "Not much honest work in this town, especially for a woman alone. Try the hotel down the street. They sometimes need help with linens." As she turned to leave, he added in a lower voice, "Stay clear of the Lily. Carson's in a foul mood today. Lost some men last night in a shootout." Temperance ducked her head to hide her reaction. "Sounds dangerous. What happened?" "Don't rightly know," Jennings said, glancing nervously toward the street. "But there's talk 7 of his men were killed trying to bring back a girl who escaped. Carson's offering $50 for information about her or the McClain siblings who helped her." $50 is a lot of money," Temperance observed. "Not worth dying over," Jennings muttered. "Now, if you don't need anything else." Temperance thanked him and left, processing this new information. Word of the shootout had spread, but the details were murky. That could work in their favor. The hotel proved more fruitful. The manager's wife, a harried woman named Mrs. Fulton, was delighted at the prospect of help with the laundry. "Carson's girls used to do it," she explained as she showed Temperance to the washroom at the back of the building. "But he's keeping them closer these days. Says they're too valuable to be wasting time on sheets." "His girls?" Temperance asked innocently, rolling up her sleeves as she surveyed the mountain of dirty linens. Mrs. Fulton's lips thinned. "The Saloon girls." "Though girls is being charitable to some of them. More like slaves, if you ask me." "Slaves?" Temperance echoed, feigning shock. The older woman lowered her voice. "Carson brings them in with false promises, jobs as maids or cooks or barmaids. By the time they realize the truth, they're in debt to him for their travel, room and board, clothes. They can never earn enough to leave." "That's terrible," Temperance said, thinking of how narrowly she had avoided the same fate. "Doesn't anyone stop him?" Mrs. Fulton snorted. "Sheriff's on his payroll. Mayor, too. Only one who ever stood up to him was Brock McClain, and look what that got him, a price on his head and his sister dead." Temperance nearly corrected her about Ruby but caught herself in time. "I heard there was trouble last night. A shootout. Carson's men went after someone who crossed him. Didn't end well for them, from what I hear." Mrs. Fulton seemed grimly satisfied about this. "Couldn't have happened to nicer fellows." As they worked through the laundry, Mrs. Fulton proved to be a wellspring of information about Eldorado Canyon. She pointed out which businesses paid protection money to Carson, which men were loyal to him, and most valuably, which people in town secretly resented his control. "Dr. Adams has no love for Carson," she said, wringing out a sheet with surprising strength. "He's had to patch up too many of Carson's girls after they've been disciplined. And Reverend Hopkins speaks against the Saloon every Sunday, though no one dares listen too openly." By midday, Temperance had compiled a mental list of potential allies. She had also learned that Carson was planning something big. A shipment of new girls was expected within the week, brought in by his associate, a man named Hargrove who specialized in finding vulnerable young women in eastern cities. That's how he stays in business, Mrs. Fulton explained. Fresh faces. Men get bored, you see. The casual cruelty of it made Temperance's stomach turn, but she kept her expression neutral as she continued to work. When Mrs. Fulton paid her 50 cents for her labor and asked if she'd return the next day, Temperance gratefully accepted both the money and the opportunity. She met the Wilson brothers at the arranged spot behind the livery stable as the sun began its westward descent. "Learn anything useful?" Sam asked, keeping watch while Thomas watered their horses. Temperance nodded, quickly summarizing what she had discovered. "Carson knows about the shootout but may not know who was involved. He's offering a reward for information." "That complicates things," Thomas said grimly. "Money makes people careless with their tongues. But it also tells us he's worried," Temperance pointed out. "If he's willing to pay for information, it means he doesn't have it yet." They returned to the boarding house as dusk was falling, taking a circuitous route to avoid being followed. Brock was waiting anxiously on the porch, his arm in a sling but his color better than when they had left. "You're late," he said by way of greeting, his eyes scanning Temperance as if checking for injuries. "We were careful," she assured him. "And I found work at the hotel. Mrs. Fulton hired me to do laundry." Inside, gathered around the kitchen table with Ruby and Davies, they shared what they had learned. Brock's expression darkened when Temperance mentioned the shipment of girls expected to arrive. "Hargrove," he spat the name like a curse. "He's worse than Carson, if that's possible. Specializes in girls from orphanages and workhouses. Nobody to miss them, nobody to ask questions." "When are they expected?" Ruby asked. "Within the week," Temperance said. Mrs. Fulton wasn't sure of the exact day. Brock stood, pacing despite his injury. "This changes things. We can't wait for Carson to make another move against us. We need to intercept that shipment." "That would hit him where it hurts," Davies agreed. "His wallet. Those girls represent a significant investment." "They represent lives," Temperance corrected sharply. "Human beings being sold into bondage." Brock nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry. It's easy to start thinking in Carson's terms when you've been fighting him this long." They spent the evening developing a plan. Temperance would continue working at the hotel, gathering information about the shipment's arrival. The Wilson brothers would scout the trails leading into town, watching for Hargrove's wagon. Once they knew when and where the girls would arrive, they could prepare an ambush. "What about Carson himself?" Ruby asked. "Even if we free these girls, he'll just bring in more." "One problem at a time," Brock said, though Temperance could see that the same question troubled him. Carson's operation was too profitable to abandon over a single setback. As the others discussed logistics, Temperance found herself watching Brock, the intensity in his eyes, the way his hand unconsciously moved to his wounded shoulder when he was thinking, the gentleness with which he spoke to his sister, despite the grim topic. In just 2 days, he had become someone she couldn't imagine not knowing. When the meeting broke up, she followed him onto the porch, where he stood looking out at the star-filled Nevada sky. "You should rest," she said quietly. "Your shoulder won't heal if you keep pushing yourself." He glanced at her, a smile ghosting across his lips. "I've had worse." "That doesn't make it less important to rest now." She moved to stand beside him, her arm almost touching his. "We need you at full strength for what's coming." "What's coming may be more than any of us can handle," he admitted. "Carson has resources, men, influence. We have righteous anger and a school teacher disguised as a washerwoman." Despite everything, Temperance laughed. "Don't forget Ruby's cooking, that has to count for something." Brock's smile widened, transforming his face. "It surely does. Many a man has been rendered docile by my sister's apple pie." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the night air cool against their skin. "Why did you really stay?" Brock asked eventually. "You could have taken the stage to Virginia City, started over somewhere Carson's reach doesn't extend." Temperance considered the question, searching for the honest answer. "At first, I stayed because I was tired of running. Tired of having my life determined by men who thought they owned the world and everyone in it." She looked up at him. "But now, I stay because there are things here worth fighting for." His eyes held hers, and in them she saw understanding, respect, and something else, something that made her heart beat faster and her breath catch in her throat. "Temperance," he began, his voice low. The moment was shattered by the sound of approaching riders, multiple horses moving at speed. Brock immediately pushed Temperance behind him, drawing his revolver with his good hand. "Inside," he ordered. "Get Ruby and the others." The riders materialized from the darkness, 5 men on lathered horses, one slumped in his saddle as if injured. Brock kept his gun trained on them as they approached, but he didn't fire. "That's far enough," he called when they were still 20 yards out. "State your business." The lead rider raised his hands to show he was unarmed. "McClain, it's Dr. Adams from town. I need your sister's help." Brock relaxed slightly but kept his weapon ready. "Ruby's not practicing medicine anymore." "It's not that kind of help," the man replied. "We've got a girl here. Escaped from Carson's place during the confusion today. She's hurt bad." Ruby appeared in the doorway, a shotgun in her hands. "Bring her in," she called, already turning to prepare a bed. The men dismounted, carefully lifting the slumped figure from the saddle. As they carried her into the light spilling from the house, Temperance gasped. The girl couldn't have been more than 18, her face a mass of bruises, one eye swollen shut. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage around her ribs. "Carson did this?" Temperance asked, following as they carried the girl inside. "His new enforcer," Dr. Adams confirmed grimly. "Goes by the name of Hawk. Mean bastard with a taste for hurting women. This one tried to run when she heard Carson was bringing in new girls. Said she couldn't bear to see more suffer like she had." Ruby directed them to lay the girl on the kitchen table, already clearing away dishes to make room. "Temperance, fetch my medical bag from under my bed, and water. We'll need lots of hot water." The next hour was a blur of activity as Ruby and Dr. Adams worked to save the girl's life. She had been beaten severely with 3 broken ribs, one of which had punctured her lung. She drifted in and out of consciousness, whimpering in pain despite the laudanum Dr. Adams administered. Temperance assisted as best she could, holding bandages, fetching supplies, and finally sitting beside the girl Eliza. Dr. Adams called her as she was moved to Ruby's bed to recover. "She's strong," Ruby said when she finally emerged from the bedroom, wiping blood from her hands. "She might make it if infection doesn't set in." Dr. Adams looked exhausted, his lined face sagging with fatigue. "I couldn't take her to the clinic in town. Carson's men watch my place. When she staggered into my back door, I knew the only safe place for her was here." "You did right," Brock assured him, "but it puts you in danger. Carson will know you helped her." The doctor shrugged. "I'm too old to care much about that anymore. Seen too much of Carson's handiwork to stomach being complicit any longer." The men who had accompanied Dr. Adams introduced themselves: a blacksmith named Ferguson, a storekeeper named Hollies, and 2 ranch hands from the spread north of town. All had grievances against Carson, from extortionate protection fees to sisters or daughters who had disappeared into the gilded lily. "There are others in town who feel the same," Ferguson said. Not enough to openly defy him, but enough to help if there was a real chance of ending his reign. We may have that chance, Brock said, explaining their plan to intercept Hargrove's shipment of girls. The men exchanged looks. That would hit Carson hard, Hollis admitted, but he'd retaliate. The whole town could suffer. The town is already suffering, Temperance pointed out. Every day Carson remains in power is another day women like Eliza are beaten, another day honest businessmen are extorted, another day justice is denied. Her words seemed to strike a chord. After further discussion, the men agreed to help. Ferguson would spread word quietly among trusted townspeople. Dr. Adams would continue to gather information through his practice, where even Carson's men occasionally needed medical attention. The ranch hands would watch the Northern Trail, supplementing the Wilson brothers' efforts to the south and east. As the meeting broke up and the men prepared to return to town, Brock pulled Dr. Adams aside. "The girl Eliza, if she recovers, what happens to her?" the doctor sighed. "She can't go back to Carson's, and she can't stay in Eldorado Canyon. He'd find her." "I might have a solution," Temperance interjected. "When I was in Kansas City, I met a woman who runs a home for girls escaping difficult circumstances. Sister Mary Catherine. She doesn't ask questions, just provides shelter and training for honest work." "Kansas City is a long way from here," Dr. Adams observed. "But the railroad goes there," Temperance said. "If we could get Eliza to the station in Virginia City." "First, she has to survive," Ruby reminded them. "One day at a time." The men departed with promises to send word of any developments. Temperance returned to sit with Eliza, bathing her fevered brow with cool water and speaking softly to her when she stirred restlessly in her troubled sleep. "You're safe now," she murmured. "No one will hurt you here." Whether Eliza heard or understood, Temperance couldn't say, but the girl seemed to calm at the sound of her voice. As midnight approached, Ruby came to relieve her. "Get some rest," she urged. "You're going back to town tomorrow. You'll need your wits about you." Reluctantly, Temperance relinquished her place at Eliza's bedside. In the hallway, she encountered Brock, who had clearly been waiting for her. "How is she?" he asked. "Holding her own," Temperance replied. "Ruby's with her now." Brock nodded, his expression troubled. "I've seen too many girls like her. Some recover, at least physically. Others—" He didn't finish the thought. "We're going to stop him," Temperance said with conviction. "Carson, Hargrove, all of them. They can't be allowed to continue treating women like chattel." "It won't be easy," Brock warned, "and it won't be without cost." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," she replied simply. He studied her face in the dim hallway light, his eyes tracing her features as if committing them to memory. "You're remarkable, Temperance Zimmerman. 2 days ago you were nearly forced into Carson's saloon. Now you're planning his downfall. With considerable help," she reminded him. "I'm not doing this alone." "No," he agreed, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch so light she might have imagined it. "You're not alone." The simple statement warmed her more than it should have. For most of her life, Temperance had been fighting her battles single-handedly, managing her father's debts, caring for her ailing mother, fending off the bank's attempts to seize their farm. To have allies, to have someone like Brock McClain standing beside her, felt like a luxury she had never dared hope for. "Try to sleep," he said softly. "Tomorrow will come soon enough." But sleep proved elusive once again. Temperance lay awake in her small room, listening to Ruby moving quietly as she tended to Eliza, and thinking of all that had happened since she arrived in Eldorado Canyon. How quickly her life had changed from desperate job seeker to conspirator against the town's most powerful man. And how quickly her heart had become entangled with a blue-eyed cowboy who had stepped between her and danger without a moment's hesitation. It was foolish, she knew, to develop feelings in the midst of such peril. And yet, as she finally drifted toward sleep, it was Brock's face she saw behind her closed eyelids, and the memory of his gentle touch that followed her into dreams. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the Nevada sun already fierce as Temperance prepared for her return to town. She donned her washerwoman disguise again, checking that no hint of her true appearance showed beneath the shabby clothes and bonnet. Eliza had survived the night, though her fever remained dangerously high. Ruby promised to send word if her condition changed, but they all knew that communication would be risky while Temperance was in town. "Be careful," Brock said as she prepared to leave with Sam Wilson, who would escort her to the edge of town before separating to continue his watch for Hargrove's wagon. "If anything feels wrong, anything at all, get out immediately." "I will," she promised, touched by his concern. The walk to town was tense but uneventful. Temperance parted ways with Sam at the outskirts and made her way to the hotel, keeping her head down and her pace unhurried. Mrs. Fulton greeted her with evident relief. "Thank goodness you're back. The sheets have piled up something awful, and we've got a stage full of passengers arriving this afternoon." Temperance set to work immediately, grateful for the mundane task that allowed her to listen while appearing absorbed in her labor. Mrs. Fulton was a natural gossip, and as she helped fold the clean linens, she shared the latest news from town. "Carson's in a state," she confided. "One of his new girls went missing yesterday, that pretty blonde he was keeping separate from the others. And now there's talk that Hargrove's arriving sooner than expected, maybe even tonight." Temperance's hand stilled momentarily before she forced herself to continue folding. "Tonight? That seems sudden." "Carson's worried about something, Mrs. Fulton said, lowering her voice though no one else was present. "Sent telegrams to Virginia City and Carson City. My husband saw them when he was at the telegraph office, requesting additional men from the sounds of it." This was troubling news. If Hargrove arrived that night with the shipment of girls, they wouldn't have time to prepare a proper interception. And if Carson was bringing in more men, the odds against them would grow even longer. Temperance needed to get word to Brock and the others, but she couldn't leave without arousing suspicion. She would have to wait until her work was finished and hope that Sam Wilson was nearby to carry the message. As midday approached, Mrs. Fulton sent Temperance to the kitchen to fetch their lunch, a welcome respite from the steamy laundry room. The hotel's cook, a surly man named Peterson, barely acknowledged her as he slapped 2 plates of stew onto a tray. "This for you and the missus," he grunted. "Yes, thank you," Temperance replied, keeping her eyes downcast. "You're new," he observed, studying her more closely than she would have liked. "Where'd you come from?" "Kansas," she said, which was true enough. "My husband died, needed work." Peterson grunted again, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. But as Temperance turned to leave with the tray, he added, "Seen you somewhere before." Her heart stuttered, but she kept her expression neutral. "Don't think so. Only arrived in town recently." He shrugged, already turning back to his pots. "Must be mistaken." Temperance hurried back to the laundry room, her mind racing. Had Peterson recognized her? Or was it just an idle comment? Either way, she needed to be more cautious. She and Mrs. Fulton ate quickly before returning to work. As the afternoon wore on, Temperance's anxiety grew. She needed to get word to Brock about Hargrove's accelerated arrival, but she couldn't risk leaving early without a plausible excuse. Opportunity came in the form of a fresh batch of sheets delivered from the guest rooms. Among them was a set stained with what appeared to be blood. "Oh dear," Mrs. Fulton sighed when she saw them. "That'll need special treatment. Carbolic acid's the only thing that will get that out, and we're fresh out. Would you mind running to the general store to fetch some?" Temperance agreed readily, relieved to have a legitimate reason to leave the hotel. Mrs. Fulton gave her a few coins and directions to Jennings' store, warning her to hurry back. Outside, the afternoon heat was oppressive, the sun beating down on the dusty street. Temperance kept her pace deliberate as she made her way toward the general store, her eyes scanning for any sign of Sam Wilson or another potential ally. She was so focused on looking for friendly faces that she almost walked directly into the path of the scarred man who had first grabbed her in the street, one of the four who had tried to drag her to the Gilded Lily. She recognized him just in time to duck her head and step aside, her heart pounding as he passed within inches of her. He didn't spare her a glance, dismissing the shabby washerwoman as beneath notice. Temperance allowed herself a small breath of relief, only to have it catch in her throat when she saw who the scarred man was meeting: a tall, elegantly dressed gentleman with cold eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. Even without having seen him before, she knew instinctively that this was William Carson. They were standing outside the telegraph office, deep in conversation. Carson was gesturing emphatically, his face tight with anger. Temperance slowed her pace, trying to catch their words without appearing to eavesdrop. "Tonight, without fail," Carson was saying. "Hargrove will bring the wagon in through the back canyon, have 4 men waiting at the crossing to escort them in." "What about McClain?" the scarred man asked. "If he gets wind of this." "McClain is injured," Carson replied dismissively. "My sources say he took a bullet in the shoulder during the shootout. He's in no condition to interfere." Temperance's blood ran cold. Carson had informed someone who knew about Brock's injury. That meant someone close to them had betrayed their location and situation. "And the girl?" the scarred man pressed. "The teacher," Carson's expression hardened. "Find her. She's the key to drawing McClain out. He's developed a weakness for her, according to our friend at the boarding house." A weakness. That's what Carson called Brock's willingness to protect her. And our friend at the boarding house, who could that be? One of the miners who had fled before the attack? Or someone still there, someone they trusted? Temperance forced herself to keep moving, though her legs felt suddenly weak. She needed to warn Brock immediately, not just about Hargrove's arrival, but about the traitor in their midst. She continued to the general store, purchased the carbolic acid as instructed, and then made her way back toward the hotel. As she passed an alley between buildings, a hand reached out and pulled her into the shadows. She nearly screamed before recognizing Thomas Wilson's weathered face. "Thomas." "Thank God. I need to get word to Brock." Quickly, she relayed what she had overheard: Hargrove's impending arrival, Carson's knowledge of Brock's injury, and the presence of an informant at the boarding house. Thomas's expression grew increasingly grim. "This changes everything. I'll ride back immediately to warn them. You should come with me. It's too dangerous for you to stay in town now." Temperance shook her head. "I need to return to the hotel first. If I disappear suddenly, Mrs. Fulton might raise an alarm. Give me until closing time, 6 o'clock. I'll meet you behind the livery stable then." Thomas was reluctant but eventually agreed. "Be careful. If Carson has informants, they could be anywhere." With that sobering thought, Temperance returned to the hotel, delivering the carbolic acid to Mrs. Fulton with a forced smile and an apology for taking so long. "The store was busy," she explained. "Had to wait my turn." Mrs. Fulton accepted this without question, and they returned to their work, soaking the blood-stained sheets in the harsh-smelling solution. As they worked, Temperance's mind raced, trying to identify the traitor. Who at the boarding house had access to information about Brock's condition and her presence there? And who had reason to betray them to Carson? The hours until 6 o'clock stretched endlessly. Every footstep in the hallway outside the laundry room made Temperance tense. Every unfamiliar voice sent a spike of fear through her heart. By the time Mrs. Fulton finally declared the day's work complete and paid Temperance her 50 cents, she was wound as tight as a watch spring. "Will you be back tomorrow?" Mrs. Fulton asked as Temperance prepared to leave. "If you'll have me," Temperance replied, wondering if she would even be alive tomorrow to keep the promise. The sun was low on the horizon as she made her way through the back streets toward the livery stable. The town was quieter now, with most workers heading home for supper or to the saloons for evening entertainment. The Gilded Lily was already coming to life, piano music spilling into the street along with raucous laughter. Temperance kept to the shadows, moving as quickly as she dared without drawing attention. She was nearly to the arranged meeting spot when she heard the sound that had haunted her dreams the previous night, the distinctive click of a gun being cocked. "That's far enough, Miss Zimmerman," a familiar voice said from behind her. She turned slowly to find the hotel cook, Peterson, pointing a revolver at her chest. His surly expression had been replaced by one of smug satisfaction. "I knew I'd seen you before," he said. "You're the teacher Carson's been looking for. $50 is a lot of money for recognizing one little gal." "You don't want to do this," Temperance said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Carson is not a man who rewards loyalty. He uses people and discards them." Peterson shrugged. "Maybe so. But $50 is $50. Now, you're going to come with me nice and quiet to see Mr. Carson. He's real anxious to meet you properly." Temperance's mind raced, searching for options. The street was deserted, no one to call for help. Thomas would be waiting behind the livery stable, but he was too far away to hear her if she screamed. If she went with Peterson, she would end up in the Gilded Lily, exactly the fate Brock had rescued her from 3 days ago. "I'll pay you $100 to let me go," she said desperately. "The McClains have money. They'll pay double what Carson offered," Peterson laughed. "Nice try. But crossing Carson is a death sentence in this town. Now move." He gestured with the gun, and Temperance had no choice but to start walking, her mind still frantically searching for a way out. As they approached the main street, she could see the Gilded Lily looming ahead, its windows blazing with light, its doors open to welcome patrons. They were passing a narrow gap between buildings when inspiration struck. Temperance stumbled deliberately, falling to her knees with a cry of pain. "Get up," Peterson growled, momentarily lowering his gun as he reached to grab her arm. It was all the opening she needed. Temperance threw the handful of dirt she had scooped up directly into his eyes, causing him to howl in pain and surprise. She scrambled to her feet and ran, not toward the livery stable where Thomas would be waiting, but deeper into the maze of alleys behind the main street. Peterson's curses faded behind her as she ran, her heart pounding in her ears. She had no plan beyond immediate escape, no destination except away from the man with the gun. The washerwoman's dress hampered her movements, the heavy fabric tangling around her legs as she fled. She emerged onto a side street she didn't recognize, gasping for breath. The town was larger than it had appeared from the main thoroughfare, with ramshackle houses and businesses sprawling in no particular order. In the fading light, all directions looked equally unfamiliar. Voices and footsteps approached from her left, men, multiple, talking loudly. Peterson calling for reinforcements. Temperance ducked into the nearest doorway, which turned out to be the back entrance of a small church. The door was unlocked, and she slipped inside, finding herself in a dimly lit vestibule. "Hello," a man's voice called from the main part of the church. "Is someone there?" Temperance froze, weighing her options. She could run back outside, but the voices in the street were drawing closer. or she could face whoever was in the church and hope for mercy. Before she could decide, a figure appeared in the doorway separating the vestibule from the sanctuary, an older man in clerical attire, his face lined with concern. "Can I help you, my child?" he asked, then his eyes widened in recognition. "You're the woman they're looking for, the teacher." "Please," Temperance began, not knowing what she was asking for help. Sanctuary silence. The clergyman held up a hand to stop her. "Come inside quickly," he said, ushering her into the sanctuary. "I'm Reverend Hopkins. Mrs. Fulton mentioned you might be in trouble." "Mrs. Fulton?" Temperance echoed, confused. "She knows who I am," she suspected, Hopkins replied, leading her toward the altar. "She has a good heart but is afraid to act openly against Carson. When she saw you leave the hotel in a hurry, she came to me." He knelt beside the altar and pressed a hidden lever. A section of the floor swung upward, revealing a small space beneath. "This was used during the war to hide Union sympathizers," he explained. "It should serve you equally well. Get in, quickly." Temperance hesitated only a moment before climbing down into the space. It was cramped but not unbearably so, with enough room for her to sit with her knees drawn up. "I'll return when it's safe," Hopkins promised. "If I don't come back by midnight, there's a tunnel leading to the cemetery. Follow it east, and it will take you beyond the town limits." Before she could thank him, he closed the trapdoor, plunging her into darkness. Muffled sounds reached her, the church door opening, men's voices, Hopkins's calm replies. Then silence. Temperance huddled in the darkness, listening intently for any sound that might indicate danger or rescue. Time stretched endlessly, measured only by the beating of her heart and the cramping of her muscles in the confined space. She thought of Brock, wondering if Thomas had reached him with her warning. Was he even now preparing to intercept Hargrove's wagon? Or was the traitor among them undermining their plans, leading Carson's men to the boarding house for a final confrontation? The idea of Brock facing Carson's gunmen while already wounded filled her with dread. In just 3 days, he had become central to her thoughts, her feelings. The possibility of losing him before she could even understand what was growing between them was unbearable. A sound above her snapped her back to the present, footsteps crossing the sanctuary floor, approaching the altar. Temperance held her breath, straining to hear if it was Hopkins returning or someone searching for her. The trapdoor creaked open, and light from a lantern spilled into her hiding place. Reverend Hopkins's concerned face appeared above her. "Quickly," he urged. "Carson's men are searching house to house. They'll be here soon." He helped her climb out, her limbs stiff from the long confinement. "What time is it?" she asked, disoriented. "Just past 10, Hopkins replied, already leading her toward the back of the church. "I've sent word to your friends. They should be waiting at the cemetery." "My friends?" Temperance echoed. "Who?" "A man named Wilson," Hopkins said, "and another tall fellow with his arm in a sling." "Brock." Temperance's heart leaped. "Brock is here in town," Hopkins nodded grimly. "Arrived an hour ago with several others. There's going to be trouble tonight, I fear." He led her to a small door behind the altar, concealed by a hanging tapestry. Behind it was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "This leads to the tunnel. Stay close to the right wall and you'll reach the cemetery in about 100 yards. "Thank you," Temperance said fervently. "You've risked much to help me." Hopkins smiled sadly. "I've kept silent too long while Carson poisoned this town. Perhaps it's time for men of conscience to take a stand." He handed her the lantern. "Go with God, my child." The tunnel was low-ceilinged and damp, forcing Temperance to stoop as she made her way forward. The lantern cast eerie shadows on the earthen walls, and the air was thick with the smell of soil and decay. But the promise of seeing Brock again propelled her forward, one careful step at a time. The tunnel ended in a small chamber with a ladder leading upward. Temperance extinguished the lantern before climbing, pushing aside a false gravestone at the top to emerge into the cool night air of the cemetery. The graveyard was silent and still, tombstones casting long shadows in the moonlight. Temperance rose cautiously, scanning her surroundings for any sign of friend or foe. "Temperance!" The whispered voice came from behind a large marble angel. She turned to see Brock stepping from the shadows, his face tight with concern and relief. Without thinking, she ran to him, throwing herself into his arms with such force that he grunted in pain as her weight hit his wounded shoulder. "I'm sorry," she gasped, pulling back. "Your injury, damn the injury," he growled, pulling her close again with his good arm. "I thought I'd lost you." For a moment they clung to each other, the fears and tensions of the day dissolving in the simple comfort of human contact. Then reality reasserted itself as Sam Wilson approached, his expression urgent. "Hate to break this up," he said, "but we need to move. Carson's men are combing the town, and Hargrove's wagon was spotted heading for the canyon crossing. We've got maybe an hour before they reach town." Brock released Temperance reluctantly. "Ruby's waiting with horses at the edge of town. Davies and the others are already in position to intercept the wagon." As they made their way through the cemetery toward the eastern boundary of Eldorado Canyon, Temperance quickly related what she had learned about the traitor at the boarding house. "We figured it out," Brock said grimly. "One of the miners, Johnston, found him going through my things, looking for ammunition. He confessed Carson's been paying him for information for months." "What did you do with him?" Temperance asked. "Ruby's keeping him locked in the root cellar," Brock replied. "We'll deal with him after tonight's business is settled." They reached the edge of the cemetery, where the town gave way to open desert. Ruby waited there with 3 horses, her expression relieved when she saw Temperance. "Thank God," she said, "when Thomas told us you'd been discovered." "It was close," Temperance admitted. "If not for Reverend Hopkins. We'll thank him properly when this is over," Brock said, helping Temperance mount one of the horses. "Right now, we need to get to the canyon crossing before Hargrove does." They rode hard through the desert night, following a trail that wound through scrubby vegetation and around rocky outcroppings. Despite his injury, Brock set a punishing pace, clearly familiar with the terrain even in darkness. "How many girls do you think Hargrove is bringing?" Temperance asked as they rode. "Usually 6 to 8, Ruby replied from behind her. "Young ones mostly, 16 to 20. Easier to control." The matter-of-fact way she spoke of such cruelty reminded Temperance of the stakes involved. This wasn't just about opposing Carson's power or avenging past wrongs. It was about saving lives, young women who, like her, had likely been lured with false promises of respectable work. They reached the canyon crossing just as the moon reached its zenith, casting silver light on the rocky landscape. Davies, the Wilson brothers, Dr. Adams, and several men Temperance didn't recognize were already there, positioned behind boulders on either side of the narrow trail. "Any sign?" Brock asked as they dismounted. "Not yet," Davies replied, "but they can't be far. Ferguson spotted them passing the North Ridge an hour ago." Brock quickly outlined their plan. When Hargrove's wagon approached, they would block the trail with felled trees already prepared for the purpose. While Hargrove and his guards were dealing with the obstruction, they would surround the wagon and free the girls. "Remember," Brock emphasized, "our priority is the girls' safety. If Hargrove surrenders, we take him alive. Same for his men. And if they don't surrender?" One of the unfamiliar men asked. Brock's expression hardened. "Then we do what's necessary." They took their positions, Temperance stationed with Ruby behind a large boulder where they would help the girls once they were freed. The night grew quiet except for the soft calling of an owl and the occasional rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. Then came the sound they had been waiting for, the creak of wagon wheels, the clop of horses' hooves, the murmur of men's voices. Temperance peered around the boulder to see a large covered wagon approaching, flanked by 4 mounted guards. A 5th man drove the wagon, his bulk silhouetted against the moonlit sky. Brock raised his hand, waiting until the wagon was directly between the 2 groups of ambushers. Then he dropped it sharply, and the men on the opposite side of the trail pushed the prepared trees into the path. The driver shouted in alarm, hauling on the reins as the horses reared in confusion. The mounted guards reached for their weapons, but it was too late. Brock and his allies emerged from hiding, guns trained on the surprised convoy. "Evening, Hargrove," Brock called to the driver. "Step down from the wagon. Nice and easy." The massive man on the driver's seat peered into the darkness, squinting to identify the speaker. "McClain, is that you?" "It is," Brock confirmed. "And I've got a dozen guns backing me up. Tell your men to drop their weapons." Hargrove laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You finally lost your mind, McClain. Carson will skin you alive for this." "Carson's not here," Brock replied evenly. "And those girls in your wagon aren't going to the Gilded Lily. Not tonight, not ever." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then one of the guards, younger than the others, barely more than a boy, slowly lowered his gun. "Smart lad," Davies commented from his position. The other guards looked to Hargrove for direction. The big man's face contorted with rage, but he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. With a curse, he signaled for his men to surrender. As they disarmed the guards, Temperance and Ruby approached the wagon. Ruby pulled back the canvas covering to reveal 6 young women huddled inside, their faces pale with fear in the moonlight. "It's all right," Temperance said gently. "We're here to help you. You're safe now." The girls stared at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. One of them, a delicate blonde no older than 18, began to weep silently. "Where are you taking us?" Another asked, her voice trembling. "Somewhere safe," Ruby assured her. "Away from Carson and men like him." As they helped the girls down from the wagon, Temperance could hear Brock questioning Hargrove. The slave trader's responses were sullen and evasive until Brock mentioned Carson's ambush plans for the boarding house. "How'd you know about that?" Hargrove demanded, suddenly alert. "So it's true," Brock said grimly. "Carson's planning to hit the boarding house tonight while he thinks I'm occupied with you." Hargrove spat on the ground. "You're a dead man, McClain. Carson's bringing in 20 men from Virginia City. They're probably surrounding your place right now." Temperance's blood ran cold. The boarding house was currently defended by only a handful of miners and Eliza, still too weak to move from her sick bed. "Brock," she called urgently. "Eliza, we have to warn them." Brock's expression was troubled as he conferred quickly with Davies and Dr. Adams. "We can't leave these girls," he said, gesturing to the frightened young women from the wagon. "And we can't take them back to a place Carson's about to attack." "I'll go," Ruby volunteered. "I can get there ahead of Carson's men if I ride now." "Not alone," Brock objected. "I'll go with her," Thomas Wilson offered. "The rest of you get these girls to safety." After a brief debate, they settled on a plan. Ruby and Thomas would ride immediately for the boarding house to warn those inside and help them escape if possible. Dr. Adams would take the rescued girls to a ranch outside town, owned by a friend sympathetic to their cause. The remaining men, led by Brock, would follow Ruby and Thomas to confront Carson's forces. "What about Hargrove and his men?" Temperance asked, glancing at the captured slave trader. "Ferguson's agreed to keep them secured until this is over," Brock replied. "Then they'll stand trial if we can find a judge Carson hasn't bought." The group separated quickly, each to their assigned tasks. As Dr. Adams led the rescued girls away and Ferguson began securing the prisoners, Brock turned to Temperance. "You should go with Adams," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You'll be safer at the ranch." "No," Temperance replied without hesitation. "My place is with you, and with Eliza. I won't abandon her after promising she'd be safe." Brock looked as though he wanted to argue but instead nodded reluctantly. "Stay close to me," he said. "And if things go bad—" "They won't," she assured him with more confidence than she felt. "We've come too far to fail now." They mounted fresh horses and rode hard for the boarding house, taking a different route than Ruby and Thomas to avoid being caught in the same ambush if Carson's men were already on the move. The desert night blurred around them as they galloped across the rocky terrain, urgency lending speed to their mounts. As they approached the boarding house from the west, Temperance could see lights blazing from every window, unusual for this late hour. Brock signaled for their group to halt at the edge of the property, studying the scene with narrowed eyes. "Something's wrong," he muttered. "Too quiet." They dismounted and approached cautiously, using the barn for cover. As they drew closer, Temperance could see movement on the porch, a figure pacing back and forth, rifle in hand. Not one of Carson's men, but Davies, who had been left to guard the place. "Davies," Brock called softly. "It's McClain." The miner turned, relief evident in his posture. "Thank God," he said as they approached. "Ruby and Thomas got here just in time. Carson's men were already scouting the place." "Where are they now?" Brock asked, scanning the darkened property. "Pulled back to regroup when they saw we were ready for them," Davies replied. "Ruby got Eliza and the others out through the root cellar. They're halfway to town by now, heading for the church. Reverend Hopkins is hiding them until this is settled." Temperance felt a surge of relief that Eliza was safe, followed immediately by renewed concern. "So Carson's men are still coming," Davies nodded grimly. "Ruby counted at least 15 riders approaching from the east. They'll be here within the hour." Brock considered this information, his expression thoughtful. "We're outnumbered," he observed, "but we have the advantage of position. And something else Carson doesn't know about." "What's that?" Temperance asked. A slow smile spread across Brock's face. "The people of Eldorado Canyon are finally standing up to him. Ferguson's been spreading the word all evening. If Carson attacks here tonight, he'll have half the town at his back." Davies laughed softly. "About time. I've been wanting to put a bullet in that bastard for years." They quickly prepared for the coming assault, positioning men at windows and behind overturned furniture. The boarding house wasn't built for defense, but its solid construction offered some protection, and they barricaded the doors and windows as best they could. Temperance found herself stationed in the kitchen with a clear view of the backyard, a loaded revolver in her hands despite her protests that she'd never fired one before. "Point and squeeze," Brock instructed her. "Don't pull the trigger, squeeze it. And aim for the center of the body, not the head or limbs." "I don't know if I can shoot a man," she admitted, the weight of the gun foreign and frightening in her hand. Brock's expression softened. "I hope you won't have to, but if it comes down to your life or theirs." He didn't finish the thought, but his meaning was clear. The wait was agonizing, each minute stretching endlessly as they strained to hear the approach of Carson's men. Temperance found her thoughts drifting to the future. If they survived this night, what then? Would Carson be defeated, or merely set back temporarily? Could Eldorado Canyon ever truly be free of his influence, and what of her and Brock? In the midst of danger and defiance, something had grown between them, something she hesitated to name, but felt with increasing certainty. If they lived through this confrontation, would there be time to explore those feelings? Or would the aftermath of violence wash away the tentative connection they had formed? The sound of approaching horses jerked her back to the present. Through the window, she could see dark shapes moving at the edge of the property, many more than the 15 Davies had estimated. Carson had indeed brought reinforcements. "They're here," she called softly to Brock, who was checking positions throughout the house. He joined her at the window, counting under his breath. "At least 20, he murmured. "Carson's not taking any chances." A voice called from the darkness, imperious, confident, accustomed to command. "McClain, I know you're in there. Come out and face me like a man." "That's Carson," Brock confirmed for Temperance's benefit. "What does he want?" she whispered. "To make an example of me," Brock replied grimly. "And to reclaim you and the girls we rescued. Can't have people thinking he's weak." He moved to the front of the house, standing just to the side of the window. "I'm here, Carson," he called. "But I'm not coming out. You want me, you'll have to come and get me." Carson's laugh floated through the night air. "Always the hero, McClain. How's that working out for you? Your sister's dead, your reputation's in tatters, and now you're holed up in a boarding house with a handful of miners against my small army." "My sister's very much alive," Brock replied. "Unlike several of your men. How's that working out for you, Carson?" There was a momentary silence, then Carson's voice again, less confident now. "Ruby's dead, has been for years." "That's what you wanted people to believe," Brock agreed. "Makes for a better story, doesn't it? The grieving brother seeking revenge for his murdered sister. But the truth is, Ruby's been here all along, helping me fight you." Another silence, longer this time. When Carson spoke again, his voice had hardened. "It doesn't matter. By sunrise, you'll both be dead, along with anyone foolish enough to stand with you. And those girls you stole from Hargrove will be where they belong, working in my establishment." "You're not getting the girls," Brock said firmly. "And you're not killing anyone tonight. It's over, Carson. The town knows what you are now. They're not afraid anymore." As if to punctuate his words, the sound of approaching riders came from the direction of town, many riders, moving quickly. Carson's men shifted nervously, turning to face this new threat. Through the window, Temperance could see a line of torches approaching 20, 30, more carried by mounted men and women. At their head rode Ferguson, the blacksmith, his massive frame unmistakable even in the darkness. "What's this?" Carson demanded, his voice rising. "Who are these people?" "The people of Eldorado Canyon," Ferguson called as they drew closer. "The people you've been stealing from, threatening, and oppressing for years." The townspeople spread out, surrounding Carson's men in a wide circle of torchlight. Faces Temperance recognized from her brief time in town emerged from the darkness. Mrs. Fulton, Jennings from the general store, ranchers and miners and shopkeepers, all armed, all determined. "This doesn't concern you," Carson shouted, his composure cracking. "Go back to your homes before someone gets hurt." "It concerns all of us," Ferguson replied steadily. "We're reclaiming our town tonight, Carson. You can leave peacefully or you can leave in a pine box. Your choice." Carson's men looked to him uncertainly, clearly unprepared to face the entire town. Some began to back their horses away, unwilling to die for their employer's vendetta. "Stand your ground," Carson ordered, drawing his own weapon. "They are bluffing. They don't have the stomach for a fight." As if in direct contradiction of his words, a shot rang out from among the townspeople, kicking up dirt at Carson's horse's feet. The animal reared in panic, nearly unseating its rider. "Next one won't miss," Ferguson warned. "Drop your weapons, all of you." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, Carson's men began to lower their guns, recognizing the hopelessness of their position. Only Carson himself remained defiant, his pistol still raised. "You're making a mistake," he snarled. "All of you. I built this town, I own this town. Not anymore, Brock said, stepping onto the porch of the boarding house, his rifle trained on Carson. It's over. Carson's face contorted with rage and desperation. With a wordless cry, he raised his gun and fired at Brock. The shot went wide, splintering the porch railing. Before he could fire again, multiple shots rang out from the townspeople's ranks. Carson jerked in his saddle, his expression one of disbelief as blood bloomed across his expensive coat. He toppled slowly from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. A heavy silence fell over the scene, broken only by the nervous whickering of horses and the crackle of torches. Then Ferguson stepped forward, addressing Carson's stunned men. "Leave Eldorado Canyon," he commanded. "Tonight. Never come back. The same goes for anyone else who worked for Carson. You have 1 hour to collect your belongings and go." The men didn't need to be told twice. They gathered their fallen leader's body and retreated toward town, their defeat evident in every line of their posture. As they disappeared into the darkness, a cheer rose from the assembled townspeople, hesitant at first, then swelling with growing confidence and relief. Temperance stepped onto the porch beside Brock, watching as the citizens of Eldorado Canyon celebrated their liberation. Men and women embraced, laughed, cried, their faces transformed by the simple joy of freedom. "Is it really over?" she asked softly. Brock lowered his rifle, his expression thoughtful. "Carson's finished. His empire will fall apart without him to hold it together. But there will be others who try to take his place." He looked down at her, his eyes reflecting the torchlight. "The fight's never really over, Temperance. But tonight we won a significant battle." As the townspeople approached the boarding house, eager to thank Brock and share their plans for Eldorado Canyon's future, Temperance felt a sense of purpose and belonging she had never experienced before. These people, strangers just days ago, had stood together against tyranny. They had risked everything for justice and freedom. And Brock McClain, the wounded cowboy who had stopped 4 men from dragging her to a life of servitude, stood beside her, his presence as steady and reassuring as the Nevada mountains on the horizon. Whatever the future held, she knew with sudden certainty that she wanted to face it with him. In the days that followed, Eldorado Canyon underwent a transformation. Carson's properties were seized by the newly formed town council, with the Gilded Lily converted into a proper hotel, and the girls who had been forced to work there given their freedom and financial compensation from Carson's considerable fortune. Hargrove and his men were taken to Carson City to stand trial for kidnapping and slave trading, their testimony exposing a network of corruption that extended throughout the territory. Several officials in Virginia City and even Carson City were implicated, leading to a sweeping reform of law enforcement in the region. Eliza recovered slowly but steadily under Ruby's care. When she was well enough to travel, Temperance accompanied her to the railroad station in Virginia City, from where she would journey to Kansas City and Sister Mary Catherine's home for women. "What will you do now?" Eliza asked as they waited for her train. "Will you stay in Eldorado Canyon?" Temperance smiled, watching as Brock purchased Eliza's ticket at the counter. "Yes, I believe I will. They're opening a proper school next month. I've been asked to teach." And McClain. Eliza's knowing smile suggested she had observed the growing closeness between Temperance and Brock. "He's staying too," Temperance replied, feeling a warm glow at the thought. "The town council appointed him sheriff. Seems fitting since he was doing the job unofficially for years." When Eliza's train departed, Temperance and Brock rode back to Eldorado Canyon together, the desert landscape golden in the late afternoon light. They had grown comfortable with each other over the past weeks, working side by side to rebuild the town. Yet there remained an unspoken tension between them, a current of feeling neither had fully acknowledged. "Ruby's expecting us for supper," Brock said as they neared the boarding house, which had been repaired and expanded following the confrontation with Carson. "She's made apple pie." "Is that a bribe to ensure we arrive on time?" Temperance teased. Brock smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Maybe, but first, I'd like to show you something, if you don't mind a short detour." Curious, Temperance followed as he turned his horse onto a less traveled path leading toward the hills east of town. They rode for perhaps half an hour, climbing steadily until they reached a plateau overlooking Eldorado Canyon. The town spread below them, peaceful in the golden light, smoke rising from chimneys as families prepared their evening meals. "It's beautiful," Temperance said, dismounting to stand at the edge of the plateau. "I never realized how picturesque it could be from up here." "This was my father's favorite spot," Brock said, joining her. "He claimed this land when he first came to Nevada. Built the boarding house with his own hands." He gestured to a flat area near a stand of juniper trees. "He always said he'd build a proper house up here someday when the territory was more settled." "Why didn't he?" Temperance asked. "Died before he could start," Brock replied. "Mining accident. Left Ruby and me to raise Lily and run the boarding house." He paused, his gaze distant. "I've been thinking lately that maybe it's time to fulfill his dream. Build that house he always talked about." Temperance's heart quickened. "It would be a wonderful place for a home," she agreed. "The view alone." "I'd need help, though," Brock continued, turning to face her. "It's a big project for one person." "I imagine Ruby would be happy to assist with the planning," Temperance said, suddenly nervous under his intense gaze. "I wasn't thinking of Ruby," he said quietly. He took her hands in his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Temperance, I know we haven't known each other long, but these past weeks, I've never felt this way about anyone before." Temperance's breath caught in her throat. "How do you feel?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like I found something I didn't know I was missing," he replied. "Like I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." The simplicity of his declaration moved her deeply. There were no flowery promises, no elaborate declarations, just the honest truth of his feelings, offered with the same straightforward courage he'd shown when he faced Carson's men. "Brock McClain," she said, squeezing his hands. "Are you asking me to marry you?" A smile tugged at his lips. "I believe I am, Miss Zimmerman, though I'm making a poor job of it." "On the contrary," she replied, her own smile widening. "I think you're doing just fine." "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering with words, Temperance stood on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I'll take that as a yes," Brock murmured against her hair. They were married 2 weeks later in Reverend Hopkins's church, with Ruby as maid of honor and Davies as best man. The entire town turned out for the celebration, transforming the main street into an impromptu festival with food, music, and dancing that lasted well into the night. As autumn turned to winter, construction began on their home overlooking Eldorado Canyon. Brock worked alongside the hired carpenters, his injury fully healed, his face tanned from days in the sun. Temperance divided her time between teaching at the new school and helping design the interior of their home, often bringing Ruby along for her practical advice and keen eye for detail. By spring, the house was complete, a spacious, 2-story structure with wide windows to capture the magnificent view, and a deep porch where they could sit in the evenings, watching the town below as it continued to grow and prosper. Ruby remained at the boarding house, which now served as a respectable hotel for travelers and a temporary home for new arrivals until they could establish themselves. One warm evening in May, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Temperance rested her head on Brock's shoulder. "You ever think about that first day?" she asked. "When you stopped those men from taking me to the Gilded Lily?" "Often," he admitted, his arm tightening around her. "I thank God every day that I was there at that moment. I was so frightened," she recalled, "but when you said she goes nowhere, I knew somehow that everything would be all right." Brock smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Just knew I couldn't let them take you. And now look at us," she said, gesturing to their home, to the thriving town below, and finally to her belly, just beginning to show the first signs of their child growing within. "Look at us indeed," he agreed, his hand covering hers where it rested on her abdomen. Sheriff and schoolteacher, husband and wife, soon to be parents. Not bad for a couple of strangers who met in the middle of a dusty street. As darkness fell over Eldorado Canyon and stars began to appear in the vast Nevada sky, Temperance Zimmerman McClain counted her blessings: a home, a purpose, a community, and most precious of all, a love born in danger but flourishing in peace. The journey that had begun with 4 men dragging her toward a saloon had led her to freedom, justice, and a happiness greater than any she had dared to imagine. In the years that followed, their family grew: first a son they named William after Brock's father, then twin daughters, Emma and Sarah. The house on the hill expanded accordingly, with rooms added for the children, and eventually a small schoolroom where Temperance taught not only her own children but others from the outlying ranches. Brock served as sheriff for 10 years before passing the badge to a younger man. By then, Eldorado Canyon had grown into a proper town with a mayor, a town council, and a reputation for fairness and opportunity that attracted settlers from across the territory. Ruby never married, content with her role as beloved aunt and proprietress of the town's finest hotel. She and Temperance remained as close as sisters, their friendship a constant source of strength and joy for both women. Occasionally, they would receive letters from Eliza, who had become a teacher herself at Sister Mary Catherine's home in Kansas City. And once a year, on the anniversary of Carson's defeat, the town held a celebration to commemorate their freedom, a tradition that continued long after many of the original participants had passed on. Temperance and Brock grew old together on their hilltop, watching their children grow to adulthood, welcoming grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. They witnessed the arrival of the railroad, the advent of electricity, and the transition of Nevada from territory to state. Through it all, they remained each other's steadfast companions, their love deepening with each passing year. And on quiet evenings, they would still sit on their porch, hands clasped, and marvel at the journey that had brought them together, a journey that began with a moment of courage in a dusty street, when a cowboy stopped 4 men and said, "She goes nowhere."